Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Have you ever heard that red wine is good for you?
Like it's good for your heart?
Yeah, maybe even helps prevent cancer.
Oh, yeah. It's a pretty common belief.
A glass of red wine a day keeps the doctor away, right?
Right.
But have you ever wondered if that's really the whole story?
Especially when you compare it to white wine.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's what we're diving into today.
We're going to be looking at the latest evidence around red wine versus white wine.
And their links to cancer risk.
We're not just speculating here. We've actually got a recent article from the Health News,
And the scientific study that it was based on,
which is a meta-analysis.
published in the journal Nutrients.
So we're going to unpack what this research actually found
Separate fact from popular opinion
and hopefully help you understand what it all means.
for your own choices.
So this study, what were the researchers trying to figure out?
Well, they were really trying to determine if red wine is truly a healthier choice than white wine
Okay.
when it comes to cancer risk.
Yep.
And they pointed out that a lot of research has looked at alcohol and cancer,
Mm-hmm.
but not many studies specifically compared red and white wine.
So this is kind of a unique look then.
Yeah. So they did what's called a meta-analysis, which means they analyzed a whole bunch of different studies that had already been done.
Okay.
They looked at 42 observational studies. So these are studies where they're just observing people.
Okay.
They're not intervening in any way.
Gotcha.
And these included both cohort studies where they followed a group of people over time
Mm-hmm.
and case control studies where they compare people with cancer to people without cancer.
Okay.
And in total, these 42 studies included almost 96,000 participants.
Wow.
And what they did was they compared people who drank the highest levels of red wine to those who drank the lowest levels.
Okay.
And they did the same thing for white wine.
Okay.
And then they looked at their risk of developing cancer.
Okay. So when they looked at all cancers combined, what was their main finding?
So their main finding was that there was no significant difference in overall cancer risk between red and white wine drinkers.
Oh.
So this kind of challenges that notion that red wine is healthier
Right.
than white wine when it comes to cancer.
That's surprising. I think a lot of people believe that.
Yeah,
But did they find any differences when they looked at specific types of cancer?
they did. So one really interesting finding was related to skin cancer.
Okay.
They found that white wine consumption was associated with a 22% increased risk of skin cancer
Oh, wow.
compared to red wine.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, and red wine consumption showed no association with skin cancer risk.
Okay.
Now, the reasons for this difference are unclear.
Mm-hmm.
They suggested some possibilities. One is that certain metabolites in white wine might have what's called a photosensitizing effect,
Okay.
meaning they make your skin more sensitive to the sun
Oh, I see.
and increase the risk of sun damage. They also considered whether people who drink more white wine might also engage in other high-risk behaviors,
Right.
like spending more time in the sun or using tanning beds.
Yeah.
But they did adjust for some of these factors in their analysis, so it's still not entirely clear why they found this association.
That is fascinating. Were there any other specific types of cancer that stood out?
Yeah, so another key finding was in women.
Okay.
They found that white wine intake was associated with a statistically significant increased overall cancer risk in women,
Oh.
but they did not find this association for red wine in women.
Okay. So for women, white wine seemed to be linked to a higher overall cancer risk.
Yeah.
Red wine wasn't.
Right.
That's another really interesting finding.
And this is something that they suggested needs further investigation
Right.
to understand what the potential biological mechanisms might be.
All of this is really interesting, especially when you consider what most people think about red wine. But before we move on, maybe we should talk about what we know more generally about alcohol and cancer risk.
Yeah, so it's important to remember that the ethanol,
Mm-hmm.
which is the type of alcohol in all alcoholic beverages,
Right.
including red and white wine,
Red and white wine.
metabolizes in the body into compounds like acetaldehyde.
Okay.
And these compounds can damage our deoxyribonucleic acid
Okay.
and proteins, which can contribute to cancer risk.
Yeah.
And in fact, excessive alcohol consumption was linked to a significant percentage of cancer cases worldwide in 2020.
So it's a pretty serious issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so regardless of whether it's red or white, the alcohol itself is a risk factor.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of shift and focus on what these findings really mean for us, the implications of all this research.
Yeah.
What are the main takeaways?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that it really challenges this conventional wisdom that red wine offers some kind of protective effect against cancer.
Right.
This is often attributed to compounds like resveratrol.
That's what we hear about a lot, right?
Yeah.
Resveratrol.
Right. Which is an antioxidant found in red wine.
Yeah.
But this meta-analysis did not find evidence to support that.
Right.
So instead of focusing on the potential benefits of red wine, I think this study really highlights the potential risks associated with white wine,
Okay.
especially for skin cancer, and overall cancer risk in women.
So it's almost like we need to shift our attention a little bit, not just ask if red wine is good, but look more at the potential negatives of white wine.
Exactly.
So no big difference in overall cancer risk between red and white,
Right.
but white wine might be associated with some specific types of cancer.
Exactly. And it's interesting because, red wine does have more of these antioxidants like resveratrol.
Right.
But it seems that those compounds, at least at the levels that people typically consume wine,
Yeah.
don't really translate to a significant difference in overall cancer risk.
Okay.
And one possible reason for this is that resveratrol is metabolized very quickly
Okay.
and has low bioavailability, meaning that not much of it is actually absorbed and used by the body.
Oh, I see. So even if it has more of those potentially helpful compounds, our bodies aren't really using them very efficiently.
Right.
And I think this is really interesting because this whole time we've been kind of focusing on this comparison between red and white wine.
Right.
But it seems like maybe we should be thinking about alcohol consumption more broadly
Absolutely.
in terms of cancer risk.
Yeah, and this study, while it focused on comparing red and white wine, it kind of indirectly reinforces this general public health understanding
Okay.
that alcohol consumption is a risk factor for several cancers.
Right, because of the ethanol.
Exactly.
Okay, so moderation is still key.
Absolutely.
Now, like with any research, there are limitations. So what are some of the things we need to keep in mind about this study, some of the limitations?
Yeah, so the first thing is that it relied on observational studies, which can show associations,
Right.
but they can't prove cause and effect.
So we're seeing a connection, but we can't say for sure that one is causing the other.
Right.
Okay, anything else?
Another limitation is that wine intake was primarily assessed through self-reported questionnaires, which, as you can imagine, are subject to recall bias and inaccuracies.
Right, people don't always remember exactly what they drank.
Yeah, exactly. Although it is worth noting that most of the cohort studies used validated questionnaires.
Okay, so that does help with the accuracy. What about some of the findings themselves, like the link between white wine and skin cancer? Are there any limitations there?
Yeah, so as we talked about earlier, the mechanisms behind the increased skin cancer risk with white wine and the increased overall risk in women are not fully understood.
Okay.
And this really requires further research to kind of elucidate those mechanisms.
So more research is needed to figure out why those connections exist.
Exactly.
Were there any limitations in terms of the types of cancers they were able to look at?
Yeah, so the analysis for some of the less common cancers was based on a smaller number of studies,
Okay.
which limits the ability to draw firm conclusions.
Right. The fewer studies, the less certain we can be. Okay,
Yeah.
so that makes sense. Anything else about the studies they included?
Yeah, they did mention the potential for publication bias,
Okay.
which is this idea that studies with significant findings are more likely to be published
Right.
than those that don't find anything. And they did find some evidence of potential publication bias in their analysis.
Okay.
However, when they used statistical methods to adjust for this bias, it didn't really change their main findings.
Okay, so they did their due diligence there. So kind of putting this all together, what were the main conclusions of this analysis from the experts?
Well, they concluded that there is no significant difference in the association between red or white wine consumption and overall cancer risk.
So that common belief that red wine is better for you in terms of cancer really wasn't borne out by the evidence.
Exactly.
Okay.
They did emphasize the significant association between white wine intake and increased skin cancer risk.
So that's something we should be paying attention to.
Yeah.
And that stronger association between white wine and overall cancer risk in women is also something they highlighted.
Yeah, that's definitely an area for future research.
So it seems like one of the main takeaways here is that choosing red wine over white wine may not actually offer you a better outcome in terms of cancer risk.
Right. It really challenges that assumption.
This has given me a lot to think about. What about you listening? What stands out to you from all of this? If this long-held belief about red wine and cancer isn't necessarily true, what other assumptions are we making about our health choices? based on popular trends rather than solid evidence.
Yeah, I think this deep dive really highlights the importance of looking beyond the headlines and really understanding the nuances of scientific research.
Absolutely.
And, we've only just scratched the surface here. The study itself calls for more research into why white wine might be linked to these increased risks.
Yeah.
If you're interested in exploring this further, you could look for articles about the effects of different alcoholic beverages and their metabolites and how those metabolites are processed by the body.
That's a great point. And ultimately, this isn't about telling you what to drink.
Right.
It's about empowering you with knowledge so that you can make informed decisions about your own well-being.
Exactly.
So until next time, happy and healthy drinking.
Cheers to that.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.